In this video, we're going to look at forming a contract with the consumer. It's one of two videos that we're going to look at because there's a few issues we need to cover and we'll split them between the two. When you form a contract with a consumer, there are a few things you need to keep in mind. The first is that a consumer is informed about the transaction that they're getting into. This involves giving them the information that they need to make an informed decision about whether they want to buy the product, what price they're going to pay for it, and what that product's going to do. There are some key things that most consumer protection laws require the consumer is provided with. First, who is the seller? This may sound obvious, but actually, if you look at lots of the distribution models for digital products, if you're working on third-party platforms, due to various agency models, commissionaire models, tax structures, and indeed just complex corporate groups, it may often not be clear to the consumer who the selling entity is. As a general proposition, it's always better to make clear who the seller is. Second, what are the characteristics of the product? Now here we're not talking about detailed specs for everything. That will usually come with the product. But the consumer does need to know important things that would affect their buying decision. So for example, there's been a lot of activity at the moment around in-app purchases. It's all very well to download a free app, but if to use that app you need to buy certain items in the app, the consumer regulators are making it very clear at the moment that that needs to be disclosed prior to purchase. Third, what's the price? Again, this may seem a simple equation, but in practice it can be quite complex. First, most consumer protection laws require the consumer be shown a total price. That includes the shipping costs and any other charges they'll have to pay. This gets particularly complex when you get to sales tax or VAT. With digital products, you may not know where the consumer is at the point they're going through the purchase flow until you come to pay. What rate of VAT or sales tax do you apply at the point of sale? You also see some variation between countries as to whether VAT needs to be included in the price, so the consumer is shown one price, or it needs to be shown separately. When designing a product for a digital market, you need to build the product so it can cope with these variances in different consumer protection laws around informing consumers. Second, the terms that you enter into with your consumer broadly need to be fair. Different countries measure fairness differently, so you can't have a one-size-fits-all, but your commercial objectives will usually accord with that because customer relations rely on them thinking that you're treating them fairly. Some key things to think about in the fairness stakes, though, are how long are your T's and C's? We have examples of case law in the UK, for example, where T's and C's have been thrown out as unenforceable simply because they were too long and no consumer would understand them. Secondly, do your T's and C's have balanced terms? Traditional drafting reserves a lot of discretion and power to the service provider. Consumer authorities quite commonly strike down terms which are unbalanced, including rights to change terms, to change the service at any point in time. The more balanced you can make your consumer terms, the more likely they are to stand up to scrutiny. Third, think about governing law. Lots of consumer laws require that a consumer has access to their own courts. So including things like arbitration clauses in consumer terms or foreign choice of law or courts often won't work and will be per se unfair. And finally, think about translation. Is it going to be fair to a consumer for them to read a document that's not in their local language? Some countries have specific rules, like France, saying that you have to deal with a consumer in their local language. Others don't. But at the end of the day, basic contract law principles apply as well. If the person you're dealing with doesn't understand the contract you put in front of them, are they going to be bound to it? Often business reasons will mitigate whether you translate or not, but translation cost and complexity on your product platform is something that often needs to be taken into account. And finally for this video, think about fair behaviour. You need fair terms, you need informed consumers, but you also need to engage in conduct which consumer authorities will regard as fair. Some key things to keep in mind here is that there's a lot of attention on the use of the word free. You need to be clear to consumers what free means if there's any charge associated with a product. Also, fairness and fair behaviour has a role to play in things like subscription products and auto renewals. This ties into your T's and C's, but also ties into the way you treat consumers, the amount of notice you give them before renewals, and what they reasonably expect from what they are buying.